What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Red Seat Radio. My name is Corbin. If you told me a year ago today that I'd be making a video on the collapse of Matt Barnes, first of all, I'd say you're nuts because I don't have a YouTube channel. But besides that, I'd say you're nuts because Matt Barnes is the best reliever on the Red Sox team. But that's exactly what's happening, because if you haven't heard already, the Red Sox have placed Matt Barnes on the 15-day IL with shoulder inflammation. Now, I assume, and I think most of you also assume, that this is more of a pseudo injury than it is a real injury, and they are just making up an excuse to get Matt Barnes out of the bullpen. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what happened to Matt Barnes. How did he go from the best reliever on the Boston Red Sox, the closer of the Boston Red Sox, to a guy who the Red Sox need to make up excuses for to get them out of the bullpen? But before I get into that, do me a favor, make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you are new here, we talk Red Sox content almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys are hitting the like buttons on these videos as well. It is the best way to help out this channel, and it would mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one. Let's get into it. If we're going to talk about the collapse of Matt Barnes, we're going to have to start at his peak. And the peak for Matt Barnes was the first half of 2021. Because going into the All-Star break, Matt Barnes was boasting just a 2.61 ERA. He had a 14.9 strikeouts per 9, which is really, really high for a pitcher. He also had a whip under 1 at 0.895. And that was enough to earn him a spot on the AL All-Star team. It was also enough to solidify his role as a closer, and probably more important than both of those two was the fact that his first half performance was enough to get him a couple year extension with the Boston Red Sox worth $18.75 million. So at the peak of Matt Barnes' career so far, he was sitting as an all-star in the American League. He was the set closer for the Red Sox, and he had earned himself an extension. But after the All-Star break, things kind of took a turn. Right after the All-Star break, Matt Barnes was put on the 10-day IL with COVID. So he was on the COVID IL. I can't remember if he fully tested positive or he had symptoms. Either way, he was on that list. And then after he came back, he had another injury in September where, in cutting green peppers to make an omelet, he sliced the tip of his finger off. And for the rest of 2021, his numbers continued to slip. In the second half of 2021, Matt Barnes had a staggering 6.48 ERA. He had a whip that had nearly doubled and was up to 1.620. And more importantly, in my opinion, than both of those stats is the fact that over the second half of the year, opponents' batting average against him went up 100 points. It went from in the high ones to in the high twos. Now, you and I both know there's a huge difference between a guy who's hitting 179 and a guy who's hitting 279, especially if you're coming in the ninth inning of games. A 10% increase doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're trying to get the last 3 outs of a game in a really close game and 10% more guys are getting on base, that's a huge issue. Matt Barnes in 2021 went from AL All-Star, Red Sox closer, to not even making the postseason roster in just 162 games. That's a really tough stretch of time. But Matt Barnes came out in the offseason and he said that, he knew that he wasn't the same guy that came back from that fateful day in August, and that he was going to use this time, the fact that he didn't make the postseason, the offseason, and the preseason, to try and get back to where he was. And that leads me right back to the shoulder inflammation injury that we were talking about at the beginning of this video. Because Matt Barnes has not only not gotten back to first half 2021 form, but he might even be worse than he was in the second half of 2022. So far this year, Matt Barnes has an ERA of 7.94, a whip close to 2 at 1.706, and remember that super high K per 9 we were talking about in the beginning of 2021? That is all the way down to 7.4, just half of where he was at in the first half of 2021. And to make matters worse, Matt Barnes consistently throughout his career, even with the bad part of 2021, was always sitting at around league average or above league average with his ERA plus, which is the league average, for those of you who do not know, is 100. This first half of the year, Matt Barnes is just at 53. That means he is 53% worse than the average pitcher in the MLB. So what's going on? What happened to Matt Barnes between the COVID IL and now? I think the obvious first answer to that question is injuries, right? We talked about 2 injuries that happened in the second half of last year. The first being COVID, and while he was vaccinated and it didn't seem like his symptoms were super bad, we're not going to entirely know to what extent Matt Barnes was affected by COVID. There have been multiple different long-term side effects that have come out and been reported from people who have had COVID in the past, and maybe he's struggling something there. The other injury we talked about was the fact that he sliced off the tip of his finger. Now, I'm not entirely sure if there is information out there on what amount of the tip of his finger was cut off. I tried to look it up, I couldn't find anything, but even if it was as little as 1/4 of an inch, that's a lot of your finger if you're a pitcher. We don't entirely know specifically exactly the extent as to how important a grip is for a pitcher, but we could probably assume that it's really, really important. If a guy loses his grip on, say, a knuckle curveball or a curveball or even your four seam, even if it's just 1/4 of an inch, that could feel like you're throwing an entirely different pitch, and maybe that's what's throwing off Matt Barnes. On top of that, there were a couple of injuries that I didn't even mention. The other one that comes out right up to the top of my head when I think about Matt Barnes was the back stuff that he had going on earlier in this year in between spring training and opening day, and maybe he's still battling with that as well. So injuries could definitely be part of the reason Matt Barnes is not performing the way that we want Matt Barnes to perform. But in my opinion, the true answer to this question is a little bit deeper than that. In my opinion, the true answer to this question is it's all in his head. And by all in his head, I don't mean he's not struggling with things physically, but just imagine you're Matt Barnes right now. You had an all-star level performance in 2021, and then whatever happened injury-wise in 2022 set you back. Now you come into an entirely fresh year and you're ready to get back to that first half 2021 Barnes again. Yet every single time you go out there, you expect it to finally click, to get back to that form, and you get beat down over and over again. On top of that happening, you have every single day articles about how you shouldn't be on the team, how your collapse is over, and this is it for Matt Barnes. You've got guys on YouTube who only played up to high school level making videos about your collapse. That has got to be the most mentally draining thing of all time. At some point, you've got to start to lose confidence in yourself, in your control, in your grip, in your velocity. You've got to lose confidence in everything you've ever known as a pitcher because it's not working and you're feeling all of the pressure. On top of the pressure of the media and yourself, you've got the pressure of your team. This team, more than last year, desperately needs 2021 Matt Barnes again. Imagine if we had the 2021 first half Matt Barnes in the first couple months of this season. We would be at a winning record. There'd be no talk about how Heim failed with the bullpen. This team would be in contention or possibly in a wild card spot right now, and Matt Barnes knows this. That has got to be one of the most mentally draining things of all time. So in my opinion, that's what's happening to Matt Barnes right now. That's what did happen to Matt Barnes, is a lot of it had to do with his head, and I think that combined with the injuries has really struck a chord with Matt Barnes, and not a good one. I really like Matt Barnes, and that kind of makes this even worse for me, making these kind of videos even worse for me. My hope is that this rehab assignment that he's going through is enough to allow him to take some serious time and hone in on what is the issue, because at the end of the day, none of us will really know what the issue with Matt Barnes is. But my hope is that this 15-day IL stint plus probably a rehab assignment will allow him to really focus in and change whatever that is and make himself a better pitcher, even a shell of what he was in 2021. Let me know what your thoughts are on Matt Barnes. Let me know what you think about what I think of Matt Barnes' lack of performances. Let me know what you think of Matt Barnes in general. And let me know if you think there's any light at the end of the tunnel for Matt Barnes. Let me know if you think that Matt Barnes can ever resurrect himself, or if this is simply it. Let me know all your thoughts down below. As always, if you've made it to the end of these videos, do me a favor, make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Like I said at the beginning, we talk Red Sox content almost every single day. Plus, you made it to the end of this video, so you might as well. Also, make sure you guys are hitting the like button on these videos as well. It is the best way to help out this channel, and it would mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one, and I will see you in the red seats.